Good afternoon, Baiba, and good morning, Jelena.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, guys.
Yeah, today on brandLingua, we're joined by Jelena Veselinovic. Jelena brings over 25 years of global marketing leadership, working across brands like Coca-Cola, I'm sure you've heard of, Danone, 𝗵𝗵𝗁, and more recently in the SaaS category at Miro in Austin, where she now resides, where she helped and really scale brand and marketing operations during a period of super rapid growth for that particular brand. She's led very large global campaigns, built teams at scale, and designed systems that really connect brand strategy, storytelling, and performance into something that actually has driven results. Imagine that. But what makes her POV especially interesting is that she's not just done the work, she's also actively thinking through it and sharing that through her writing on Substack with Rewire Your Mind, where she explores how marketing really functions inside organizations, where things break down, and what it takes to align brand and growth in real practice, not just theory, which is very close to our heart here at brandLingua. So, because, while most teams like to talk a big game about connecting brand and performance, very few actually then build the systems that make that possible. So we really feel this conversation is about what it's probably going to really take to do that well across teams, across markets, and really inside that space in between and that messy reality that a lot of organizations operate in. And so we can only assume that's probably where things are going to go. So we're super excited to have you, Jelena.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm honored to be on this podcast. I'm also honored to get to know you because I've been a long time admirer of both of you. So I'm just excited to have this conversation.
Let me ask you the first question, the opening question. And the question is about your career journey and about the things that you have learned when you were starting as a marketer, as a professional, as a practitioner. And what did you learn when you started out? And what were the things that you unlearned when you were practicing for a longer period of time?
Oh gosh, now I need to remember. It's like a long, long, long trip down the memory lane. And yes, Christopher, by the way, the 25 years that you referenced, I would say yes, approximately. I kind of don't like to count, but it's somewhere in that range. I usually like to start this, recapture of my professional journey by saying, long time ago, in the kindergarten, I started there and there because from this perspective, honestly, it feels as far as a kindergarten. But before I tell you about my career journey, just wanted to say one thing, which is, and maybe it connects to your kind of theme of learning and unlearning. What I came to realize in general, the time or the progression of time, but as well, my career journey, I really don't see it as a linear process. It's more circular. Because you constantly go through these phases of learning and unlearning, and you connect the circles. And each time you connect the circle, you integrate some of it, inside of you, and then you start again. Even though our brains process the time as linear, and that's how I will tell my career journey, I don't see it in that way. So anyhow, back to my kindergarten experience. A long time ago, in a very small country that most people, at least in the US, don't even know that exists or usually confused with Siberia. The country is Serbia in East Europe. I was a philosophy student. And I always thought that was my path. The reason I chose that was that I was always passionate about learning the reason or the answer to everything. I was always passionate about knowledge. And even if you think about the name philosophy, it comes from this combination love of wisdom. So anyhow, I unfortunately did not end up under the olive tree thinking about life. I wish I did, but I didn't. But that was kind of a driver in my career of everything, like the driving force behind everything. And not only that desire to learn and to understand, but also desire like to go deep under the surface, and to learn the non-obvious reasons. Because I think, like a great, how to say, problem in today's world and in marketing world is that we became lazy. We go with the first, most obvious explanation to everything that is very commoditized, very boring. Everyone is saying the same thing. I always hated this. I always wanted to go deep and find something that no one sees. So you will see kind of a signature of that in everything I do, including the Substack newsletter. Anyhow, that was me philosophizing when I was growing up. That was a time of whatever, autocratic leader, tyrant. At that time in Serbia, I was spending a big time of my life out on the streets protesting against him for many, many years. So I also happened to be part of the student opposition at that time, and I was actively participating, opening student protests. I even have the film recording of that I'm very proud of. So anyhow, that was my revolutionary past. During my philosophy studies, I was looking for a job, and then I stumbled across the agency called 𝘄𝗵𝗁𝘁, obviously advertising agency. I just went there, got a job. I was still a student at that time, and I stayed. I stayed there for, I don't know, like probably 8 years or something, and I became VP of strategy of the media department at that time. And that's when I started working for Coke. Coke was pretty much my first and most important client. And then as soon as the opportunity opened up on the Coke side, I crossed over to the client side. So that was actually the start of my serious career. So I started there. And why is that important for me is to understand. At that time, Serbia doesn't exist on a map. Working for the world's biggest global brand company, I felt so inferior, like about everything, about myself, my knowledge, like my role, like everything possible. And, like the only way really to feel deserving of that opportunity was to learn, and I have this like a strong inner drive, unfortunately, like to learn and, like to be the best I can. So I was reading and reading and reading and reading. And, like until I thought I knew everything I could know, because I also didn't have the classical marketing background. So I needed to catch up with that. So I did, and very soon after that was recognized, like by some people on a, like regional level, like all the like higher levels. So I moved out of Serbia, which is a different story that I will not talk about now. But anyhow, I moved out. I started in Central Europe. I became responsible for the Central Europe for media advertising. It used to be called communications at that time. And anyhow, the long story short, after my 10 years tenure in Central Europe, I was offered the role in Russia, and Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And I remember getting a call from the HR in Atlanta, and they were telling me, oh, we have this wonderful role for you, and you should come, and we want you, and we need you. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm not going there. And they were like, but you must, it's a great opportunity. I'm like, no, my family situation does not allow for that. And they were like, that's your stepping stone. Go there. And after that, all the doors will open for you. I'm like, okay, fine. So I went there. Like it felt a little bit as serving in the army. Like you need to serve then 4 years and then everything will be possible. So I served my 4 years, which turned out to be probably the most rewarding part of my career, both professionally and personally. I learned a lot. So I felt really useful there, and I just loved everything about people, culture, like maybe not living, but I loved the people. And after that, as promised, I was offered the role in Atlanta in the global headquarters. Now, the global headquarters for a little girl starting from Serbia was just like a heaven. It was just like joining the gods on the Olymp. So anyhow, I went there and oh my God, that was an experience. It was positive and negative and sobering and exciting and all of the same time. I was given the most amazing opportunities while being there, learned a ton. I'm truly grateful, not only to the company, but more than the company, to people, because I think company is made of people and there are few people that really made a huge impact for me personally in my life. So anyhow, that was the Coke era. I started freelancing, consulting, obviously continued working for Coke. My first consulting company was called Angry Girl. If you are reading my Substack, which is not called Angry Girl anymore, that name had to go because I learned that it was not very client friendly. I mean, no one really wants to pay an angry girl for anything. But it was an important name because I think it really captured my alter ego. And the reason for us speaking today is because that's who I am. Now, like often people think anger has a very bad rap, specifically in the Western world. Like you're not supposed to be angry. I am. I'm angry about all the things that are wrong in the world. Like for me, the anger is a strong driving force. It is a progressive, positive force because I'm driven to change things for better. Even if you read in Substack, etc., there is always a seed of that, to call it disagreement, dissatisfaction. I think it's really the dissatisfaction about the state of things and a significant need and push to change things. And also something that was clear or clearly defined throughout my whole career. I often like to start the conversation by saying that I'm Serbian. Now, like that really does not mean anything because I don't believe in national roots or that. I think people are people because of who they are, not because of where they're coming from. But my Serbianness is important because there is a lot of fatalism in our collective genes or in DNA, and that's what I believe in. But like what that fatalism means and how it connects to the angry girl is, like I was once, people usually consider me as brave, and I'm like, I'm everything but not brave. Like I'm not that. But what I believe in is that when you see something, like so clear that you cannot unsee it, you have no chance, you have no choice, like you need to go after that. You need to go and, like fix it or do something about it. Like going back to my revolutionary, like background, it's not bravery. Like you just feel you have responsibility to change things. So anyhow, that was me, my whole career. That was me, like as an angry girl. That is me right now. After Angry Girl, I joined Miro. Now, Miro was a very important step in my life and my career because it's exactly what your question was about. What have I learned? What have I unlearned? Now, after spending 18 years at Coke, I felt that I was being boxed in one specific view on life, marketing, whatever you call it, school of thought. And I felt that I was becoming sort of irrelevant or detached from the world or disconnected from the world. So I stepped out of that world and I was looking for the opportunity where I could break all of these beliefs, where I could shed all of that and start again. Because there is also another thing that I believe, especially when you are successful in your career. and going back to the circular way of living. You are going in circles like the spiral. You are growing, you are learning. You reach the plateau and you stop learning. It is a very comforting place because you feel, everything you can learn. And it gets so easy. I think when you reach that place, the only way to break through that plateau is by force. Otherwise you can't do it. So I forced myself out of that comfort zone and stepped into category that I didn't know anything about, which is a B2B tech startup. I didn't know anything about it. Now, I have to credit the vision of Miro CEO, 𝗵𝗵𝘁 𝗵𝗪𝘁, who gave me that opportunity. During the interview, he said to me, which I will never forget, and I will always be grateful to him for that. He said, we want you not despite of the experience you don't have. We want you because of the experience that you have. He actually wanted to bring someone with a completely different point of view in the world of B2B. And that was very brave of him, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. Now, Miro was a shocking experience. It was a scary experience. I felt so lost that I never felt lost before. I felt lost because the foundation of everything I thought I knew about marketing was just falling down. And I found myself, I think our knowledge, our experience, it's almost like acts as a shield that protects you. So you are untouchable, like you have answer for everything. I lost that. And all of a sudden, I almost felt naked. Me, my critical thinking, and no experience at all. So it was very uncomfortable position. I needed to learn everything anew. And I didn't, because there were lots of things that I didn't agree with. So I can't say that I learned new things. I said that I integrated parts of the things into who I was, like to create some, like a new state almost. So it's not direct learning, it's more of integration. And I left after a couple of years, and now I'm back to consulting.
Okay.
The same me, but different.
I'm going to hear you reflect upon something that I think pulls together a number of the points that you've just gone through. You talked about, your angry girl and your want to have these sort of disagreements, but then also recognize that your own identity is somewhat fluid and how it's constructed. In a particular piece that you wrote, I won't read the whole thing back to you, but I'll kind of bring you along the beats to get you into where your framework was going. Essentially, you're talking about how brand theory loves stability, linear cause and effect, and it goes through these beats. And these beats that I'm about ready to hit should be very familiar to much of the audience. I think a lot of strategists really hold these to be like, this is what you do. You read the culture, you identify the tension, you build the myth, and you deliver it consistently over time. But then you say, that world is gone. And no amount of trend reports or cultural listening dashboards will bring it back. And then you quote a very often quoted luminary in our industry from the past, 𝗄𝗵𝗁𝘁, who says, people build brands as birds build nests from scraps and straws we chance upon. And then you say, it's a lovely sentence, and it contains in miniature the assumption that is breaking. The word is build. Expand on that.
Oh my God, that's my most recent one, and it's another of my shower thoughts. That's where all my pieces come from. Like when I have this unbearable need to, I don't know what's better expression, give birth to something, like you can't contain it, so it needs to come out. And this was one of them. And I will probably expand to something that is not part of your question, but I think it was an important part of that piece. And the previous one, which was the first part of the series, was about how marketing is changing. And the second one that you quoted is about how branding is changing. Now, I'll start with what was the reason behind that series, and then I'll go back to your question. Back again to your question, to the theme about learning and unlearning. After all these many years in my career, I think I arrived to the natural place. When you start questioning things and you look back and you almost question, what have I done with my XYZ number of years? What did I create something? Like, what am I leaving behind? Who am I right now? I don't know. It's part of existential crisis, but I am constantly in existential crisis. Like, it's my modus operandi. I came to the realization that all the things that I believed in about marketing and branding are simply not true anymore. That poses a question of who I am. What do I do? What do I know? Going back to this piece that you quoted. So, yes, even when you think about the language that we are using, which is brand building, no one is building brands anymore. The brands, even as an entity, do not exist the way they were existing before. Because the main assumption, and I'm going to Douglas Holt, that was one of the biggest authorities for me growing up and learning about branding, especially in Coke. I cannot paraphrase him exactly, but his whole theory is that the brands are these beacons of meaning, that people that are tapping into unresolved cultural tensions to kind of show the way to people, to help people resolve some deep unresolved cultural tensions. That's, let's say, his point of view, which basically means that brand is that something that we are looking at or trying to associate with that helps us understand who we are, where do we belong, what do we think. It's some sort of a beacon or lighthouse that shows you where you are. And then I was thinking, if that's true, then the underlying assumption is identity, personal identity. Brands tapping into our cultural identities, or we aligning our identities with brands. And I realized that actually the biggest problem of the branding theory right now is that identity as such has changed. The way we were constructing identity in the past is just not true anymore. In the past, in the good old time of Mad Men, we were building our identity by aligning our point of view with various authorities, whether these were brands or institutions or authors or media or whatever that was. And the identity was unmoving, monolith, building over time and unchanging for the most of your life, with the exception that obviously you were going through life stages, so you were maturing up. But that was it. And today, the social media changed all of that. So we are changing identities as we are changing filters on Instagram, because the cost of changing identity is literally zero. I'm one person on Instagram, another person on LinkedIn, I'm a third person here, and then obviously there is a person that no one sees that my family knows. I'm not one identity, I'm many identities. And that doesn't mean that I'm shallow or that I'm inconsistent or any of that. They say I contain multitudes, and I do. And that multitudinality is kind of captured in my different identities. So if the brand building assumes tapping into singular identity, but there is no such a thing anymore, which means that brands cannot hold that Zoe's coming, like she's talking about that, like that the brand is not, I don't want to butcher her like words, but it's not a monolith meaning anymore. Like, it's not a language, it's a grammar. And that grammar can be like applied across different identities. So back to your question, Christopher, like we built marketing like on a kind of Newtonian physics laws or of stable cause and effect, linear vision of reality. Like that doesn't exist anymore, if ever existed. Like you can't assume that I will say one thing and like you will now think something of me and go and do stuff. Because in the new world, at any point in time, nothing is predictable anymore. The only thing that is actually predictable is unpredictability, because the reality, the state of reality changed. So at any point in time, something can happen that will change your perspective on reality. It can be a post, it can be news, it can be something else. Something comes in, everything changes. And the brand needs to be able to tap into that constantly fluid reality and still has the same meaning. So I think that the state of brands and branding is changing. It's not Newtonian anymore. And we as professionals, we just need to adapt. And that's probably the biggest unlearning lesson.
If I can continue unlearning topic, what then could be your second biggest unlearning?
Oh, yeah, I have a big second unlearning, and it's linked actually to my time at Miro, which was, I was leading the brand marketing there at my time, and the company had huge ambitions for brand as such. And I was super ambitious and all pumped up and like really loved everything about Miro. I still do. But I came in as this Coke person into Miro environment. And I thought, oh my God, how difficult can that be? I know everything about brand building and I'll show them now. And I still think that I know a lot. And that by applying my knowledge, I can create value. The things could change for better. I strongly believe in that. But after several years, I realized that my role was never to build a brand. Sorry, using building the brand, which we just discussed, it's not the right terminology anymore. But anyhow, it was never about brand building. I mean, yes, of course, I needed to do that as well. But my role was really about bringing people up, the rest of the organization, to the level where I was. Because you cannot, your first customer, your most important customer, is actually people internally, the system. If they don't believe in what you are doing, it will never come true, or it will never come out, because the system alignment, the system belief, the whole system rallied around the single ambition, the single idea, is the most powerful force there is. If you think you are the smartest, like a subject matter expert, and you are working against everyone else, then whatever brilliant you are, and however good and true whatever you are doing is, it will die out, because the environment in which it exists, it's not favorable for it. So yes, building brands, but more than that, lifting up people, like that can endorse, like that vision. So that was, and like, it's not about politics, like not really, but you need to elevate the receivers of your message so that they would be on the same level, like to understand, embrace, and integrate that throughout the organization. You can't work alone. So that was my biggest learning and unlearning process.
How did the language shift when you went from Coca-Cola, which probably had its own systemic language and means for which everyone, it was kind of probably its own Tower of Babel, like lighthouse that everyone orbited around to kind of speak Coke. And then you ended up at Miro with perhaps a different vocabulary and how you had to start to port these things over. Talk about that a bit.
Language, what a wonderful, fascinating topic. Wittgenstein, like the philosopher, said once that the limits of my language are the limits of my world. So you can really ever only think within the limits of your language. And that was so painfully true when I made that shift. Coke and Miro, two different worlds, two different philosophies, worldviews, and they were both captured in the language. Coke is always talking about the brand love. Miro doesn't have the equivalent of that. And before I answer to your question, I'll just say one side note. After several years at Miro, I came to a conclusion. I'm not going to talk about the brand anymore. I realized brand is like a dirty word that scares off people. So I'm better off if I keep inspiring people or leading people, guiding people towards the goal that I want to achieve. Just don't speak about the brand, right? Because that will turn off everyone. So yes, even the brand itself did not mean the same thing. So I needed to learn a new vocabulary. But when they are talking about the difference between consumer brands and B2B brands, I don't buy that. I really don't believe in that. And fortunately or unfortunately, I was very vocal about it. Like I was saying, what do you mean the decision makers in B2B? You are always talking about the decision makers, whoever these mythical people approving these multi-million-dollar deals. I'm like, who are these people? Do they exist on some different planet? I don't understand them. Like they're actually the same people buying groceries, buying Coke, buying, I don't know, toilet paper. They are same people. They just have a different role in their organizations. But it doesn't mean that they don't respond emotionally, behaviorally to the same triggers. Anyhow, that's a big no in B2B. So you need to embrace that idea that B2B decision makers are a different kind. So that was one of the things that I strongly disagreed with. But otherwise, I also realized that, ironically, yes, it's two different languages, but they are simply translation. So I needed to learn to translate everything I knew to the new lexicon. But Christopher, it was funny. At one point, someone, not to name names, like they said, no one even understands you here. Speaking about the language that I used. And well, I said, that's really not my problem. That the people don't speak the marketing language, but they don't. And I think it is, when you think about the evolution of the industry, I seriously think it's a huge problem. It's a huge hurdle. And even Mark Ritson speaking about the decline of the overall knowledge and capability, I think it's also connected to that. How can we even learn? Or how can we created those separation between classical marketing and modern marketing, whatever that is. I don't believe in that either. I think the classical marketing is still true. It just needs to be reinterpreted. But you can't even learn from it if you don't understand the language it is using. So how can we help these new people, young people, become better marketeers if we don't speak the same language? It's as simple as that. That was part of my experience at Miro, but I kind of learned the lingo and learned how to translate things.
Talking about the language and to understand each other, when you mentioned classical marketing, what do you mean by that?
Our classical marketing, pretty much like a Byron Sharp school, like how brands grow and like maximizing reach over frequency and, like the difference in targeting. I think that's huge as well, like targeting as many people at least once, like instead of, I don't know, like building loyalty with fewer people, such as decision makers, by believing that the brand is one of the strongest levers of the company growth. These are the things that like I call classical marketing. Even though the one thing that I also unlearned during the Miro time, which is paradoxal a little bit, but in B2B companies, and that's all part of the Silicon Valley playbook, like the reason the brand and branding is a dirty word, because everything revolves around the product. Everything. Like nothing is ever as important as the product. Like that was kind of a humbling experience, because going from the company, like from the biggest, most valuable, probably not most valuable, but among most valuable brands in the world, like that was where all the value was concentrated, like in this intangible equity of the brand. Like going from there to the company that doesn't even recognize the value of the brand, like but celebrates the product, was so humbling. Like it is a it is a sobering experience. So, all of a sudden you need to reevaluate like your professional value. What is it that you do? Or what's your purpose? Now, I'm saying that that's ironic, because the one thing that I learned at Coke was that the brand does not exist without the product. Like you can't separate the two things. We were never, ever thinking that the brand is more important than the product. And the only thing that we were saying is that the brand, like is this like a, I don't know, layer of the product that, like speaks to people, that is deeply rooted in the product. So I never said that the product was not important, but, like in B2B companies, they believe that somehow like brand is a threat to the product. And if you believe in brand, you don't believe in product, which is insane. So they need to exist at the same time. So anyhow, that was my other humbling learning experience.
When we first met, you spoke of an interest in reflecting on these sort of binaries, right? Of how like it either has to be brand or it has to be product. There was another binary concept you brought up that you had interest in discussing, which was the concept of sort of East versus West Stern thinking and how you've interacted in and around that in your career. And that seems to also have its own identity tensions, its own language barriers, its own different kind of concepts of what is classical, what is not classical, even from those points of view and perspectives. Curious how you've been successful navigating that binary tension that you perhaps have also found yourself in the space in between.
Yeah, it is a big part of who I am and big part of my career, and like almost a signature. And hey, I have many scars, like too many to count, but I'm proud of all of them. And I think I would never be who I am without them. And, like that tension between East and West is part of that. So I come from the Eastern Europe, and I don't think that defines who I am. I don't think that's important. But let me say something that I never said anywhere before. I was often, more often than not, discriminated because of that. I think it's important that we speak about that, because I have that thick accent. My English is good, but it's not perfect. I can't go to the grocery store that the cashier does not ask me where I'm coming from. I'm tired of explaining where I'm coming from. I'm a person and I want to be valued as a person. Who cares where I'm coming from? But that's part of me, and I carry that. And honestly, it's a burden I carry. And it is, in a way, the source of discrimination. So anyhow, that was something that I had to fight my whole life, but I don't care. I'm like, I know who I am. I know what I know. And I believe in myself. So anyhow, I spoke earlier about me arriving in over many, many, many years to the Olymp of all marketing gods in Atlanta, to Coke headquarters, the city of the happiness factory. I can't tell you how excited I was. I thought that all of my dreams came true. I was so proud of myself. I still am. And, I will never forget this moment, so intimidated, so, full of self-doubt, just didn't, I didn't know if I was worthy. I didn't know, why me? Why did they select me? They will suddenly realize that I know nothing. Okay, so I came there. And I remember, as it was yesterday, this one meeting. I was sitting in this meeting. It was full of these global people talking about some campaign. I will not give details, obviously, but anyhow, I'm sitting there feeling very important. Everyone is talking about something. I have no idea what's happening. I'm so confused. If I could disappear, I would love that. Why? Because I had no clue what was happening in that meeting. And I remember thinking, okay, my English is not perfect, but I do understand individual words. I swear, I could understand the words. I couldn't understand what they meant. When you put them into a sentence, I had no clue. Now, I had no clue because they were not making any sense. After the meeting, I'm like, okay, what was discussed? What was agreed? What was said? I mean, nothing. It's this skill of spitting the words without saying anything. And it took me a long time to understand that it's not me, it's this corporate lingo, that is in a way created to not say anything. Or not say anything, to sound smart, very smart, without committing to anything. Because it's always so ambiguous, that you can quickly change sides whichever way the wind blows. It was a culture in which I went. I learned to navigate that culture, over time. It was painful, but I did. Now, very painful and very important in my career, especially when you are in a senior position at Coke. We were going constantly to some kinds of trainings, workshops, this and that included a lot of personality coaching, testing, all these things, which I love, by the way. I love understanding who I am. And I was grateful for that. And in each, whatever that session was, training, whatever type of personality test was, I was also always, there was a cluster of people somewhere on the map. And then there was me outside of that map. I couldn't even fit on the bloody map. And, firstly, that's really not good for your career, that you don't belong. But more that it's not good, it's really painful. It's really painful living in a space that is constantly challenging your values. That's how I felt. It's exhausting. Little me like I would go to the coach and I would ask them, like, what do I do with this? Like, what do I need to do? How, like, how do I change? Like, I don't know what to do with this information. And they would tell me something that is really unhelpful, but they would say, like, you are a very precious member of the organization because every organization needs someone to balance them out. And I was like, for God's sake, like, don't make me be that person. Like, I never signed up for that glorious role of balancing everyone out. Like, it's painful. Like, that literally means putting a costume every day and going for the fight. I realized always that people would, when they wanted to fight for something, argue, whatever, make a decision change, they would bring me into the meetings. I'm like, what am I? Like some sort of a fighter? Like, I never chose that role because I speak my mind. I never learned not to speak my mind. Like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to create these empty sentences. It also shows on my face. But anyhow, so that's who I was. And then, like some wonderful, dear people that I met at Coke, like they were telling me, like they were saying, you are keeping us honest. I'm like, okay, good. If, like if that's what I do, fine. I don't know. I'm a little proud of that. But, like I just wanted to say, yes. And the other thing, I stayed there for 18 years. Despite all of that, I guess that's another part of my fatalistic view on life. I didn't stay because it was easy. I probably stayed because it was difficult. Like, because winning something that is easy, I'm not interested in that. I want to do things that are difficult. And I naively wanted to make that world better and more honest. People were honest, but more honest about what's going on. I wanted to change them, even though it was me against the system. That was obviously very, very true at Miro. It's very true everywhere. Even now, like in the company that I'm working with, somehow magically everyone takes that as like a modus operandi. Like I'm called difficult. Not difficult in a bad way. Some people see it in a bad way. There are few people like that, but most people see me as a difficult in the sense that I'm going against the grain. And they actually appreciate that.
I think you froze for a second.
Okay, I'm back. You're back.
Sorry, we can take a small pause.
Sure.
I would love to continue the conversation, but we also need to be mindful about your time because we are already recording for 1 hour.
No, whatever you wish. I know the time. What else do you want to ask? So just go on with whatever your plan is. I'm fine.
I have one question, if I may.
Yeah.
You said at the beginning of the conversation that our industry is lazy and that people are basically stopping at one explanation about some sort of term in marketing and they don't dig deeper. What would be your suggestion or advice how to break this pattern?
So you see here, I don't have a classical marketing background, even though I read so much, probably I know equally well things as if I did have, but I didn't. That's where my philosophy background really helped, because the philosophy is critical thinking. And I like to say that the things that we do at marketing, it's not rocket science. It's just about asking the right questions until you get to that answer. One of the items, it's us keeping asking questions until you arrive to the answer beyond which there are no more questions, like a 5 whys technique. Just keep asking why, until there are no whys left. Just simple as that. I think that the industry is really driven by this confirmation bias so much, because you are asking whys until you arrive to the why that suits your argument, and you don't go beyond that. So kind of the truth is relative, and it's manipulated a lot. Like we do researches to prove our hypothesis. We don't do researches to learn new things. We don't do researches to be challenged, to be wrong. Like I've seen that. It's another reason behind my angry girl. Like when you are high enough in the operation, like the most successful people know how to manipulate the truth and the numbers to serve their career. And they're not even lying, like they're not lying because, like everything is relative. If you pick up, like the things that will create the perception of reality that serves like your ambition, that's true. I mean, it's not untrue. It's just like one version, and it's not full version. But that's what's happening. I've seen that so many times. And to answer your question, I think it's as simple as applying like critical thinking, asking why, but being very honest about that and searching for truth beyond everything else. There is another thing that I always felt it's important, and it was always part of my logic that it's not rocket science. Everyone can do it. I don't think marketing is a skill. I think marketing is, yes, it is a skill, but it's more than anything a point of view. It's like, it's a belief, and I think everyone can do it. But another part of that was the industry likes to talk about insights. Like the insights are these mythological things that no one understands. And we take pride in being the special chosen people that can identify insights. But the one thing that I learned, which is like me and all of you, the most important tool that I have for doing marketing, because I think that the empathy is at the core of everything. You need to be able to understand the other person. And you can't understand the other person unless you have that pattern of thinking and the experience inside of you. The way how to recognize insights and identify, articulate insights is actually by enriching your own instrument inside of you so that you can see it. If you don't have it inside of you, you will not be able to see it. Christopher, back to the language conversation. I was reading yesterday, going back to Wittgenstein, because I'm obsessed by the limitations of language, ontology, meaning, all these things. I think it's so important for us as marketeers or strategists. So anyhow, I was reading Instagram. There was this post. It was saying, think of a bird. So think of like a group of people standing and holding closed boxes. So each of these closed boxes contains a bird. There is a bird in each of these boxes. But the only rule is that the box can never be opened. Like I have a bird in my box, but you can never see the bird in my box. You are speaking of a bird that is in your box. But we can only understand those words on some sort of a shared definition level. There is no guarantee that my definition of the bird and your definition of the bird is the same. So the language is imprecise. That's why I'm saying for us as a strategist, it's not about language. It's about lived experience and building those patterns of meaning inside of us that will help us understand when you are speaking of the bird, that, I can tap into my experience of the bird so that I can relate to you. And we are our own most sophisticated tools. So I would say to all the young people and people that want to learn is that the path to strategy is by understanding yourself first and foremost. And that means observing life. It means reading. And for God's sake, not marketing books. Learn books about people, about life. Read Russian classics because they understand what the pain is. And pain is usually the most important driver behind everything. And read philosophy if you want as well. But yeah, that's me about understanding the meaning and understanding the truth behind things. So not rocket science.
If there was certain philosophers or books related to philosophy that you would recommend to someone that you have found uniquely applicable or inspirational as it relates to this world that we're working in, what might those be? And then if anyone wanted to follow you or to connect more with you in your own readings, if you could let them know explicitly how to do that, would be maybe a great way to close us out.
I was afraid you will ask me that, and that I will have to admit that I'm not reading anything at this moment. But I'll tell you one book. I don't know why. I keep going back to that book, philosophy book, over and over again. I am, in general, like the classical Greek philosophy lover. So I always go back there. By the way, there was this inscription on the oracle in Delphi, like in ancient Greece. That was, know thyself.
Yeah, know thyself.
And I learned about that when I was, 13, 14 years old. I didn't live in the oracle of Delphi, but wrote that on the door of my room. And I carried that in me. I don't have any tattoos. I'm thinking about it, but like that would be the first and probably the only tattoo I would put, like know thyself, because for me that is a single truth that defines everything in my life. Going back, Christopher, to your question about, like the books, the philosophers, like definitely Plato. And I often actually use that allegory in many of my writings, is the allegory of a cave, like from his writing. And why I believe is important and connects to everything that I was talking about. Like there were people, like slaves, that were chained to the wall in the cave, and behind them was a fire. And then there were people and figures going behind them. And because of that fire, there were shadows of real life projected on the cave wall in front of them. So for their entire life, the only thing they could ever see were the shadows, not the real life. To the point that they started to believe that's all that exists. And this captures so much about the world in which we are living, but also the things that we do. Because even like a branding, marketing, I don't know. I think they are the shadows of the real things, of the real ideas. That's what we are projecting in a way. The story goes that one of these slaves got free and ran out of the cave to realize that there is a real world outside the cave, and came back to excitedly inform his imprisoned friends, slaves, that what they are seeing is not the real thing, but they are just the shadow reflections of the real world. So anyhow, he freed them all. They came out, and like the strong light, like of the real sun and outside world, like hurt their eyes, and they ran back, like to that cave because it was more comfortable to them. And they rejected the reality, like for the shadows that they were accustomed, like for their whole lives. I love that allegory. Like I often write about it, and like again, I think it explains the world in which we operate, like as marketeers and as strategists.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. I believe our both pleasure to have this conversation with you. It was very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the conversation. And thank you for letting me bring out all of my anger into the world. Now I feel much better. Thank you, guys.
For those listening and watching, please follow Jelena Veselinovic on LinkedIn, as well as her Rewire Your Mind newsletter on Substack. Again, it is the gift that keeps on giving. It's very nutritionally dense, and it's full of wonderful provocations and thought pieces, much of what you've experienced here over the past hour or so. So again, thank you again, Jelena, and we hope to see you again, perhaps maybe in person at some point. Cheers.
Thank you, Christopher and Barbara. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.